Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today we will discuss about ulna. Ulna, this is the medial bone of forearm and it is homologous to the fibula of lower limb. What are the parts? Ulna is a typical long bone. So ulna has three parts. These are the upper end, lower end and intervening shaft. So let's come to the upper end. Upper end, it is expanded and hook-like structure, and it contains two processes and two notches. What are they? These are the two processes, olecranon process and coronary process, and there are two notches. This is two notch, trochlear notch and radial notch. So this is olecranon process, this is coronary process, and there are two notch. This blue one is the trochlear notch, and this side is the radial notch of ulna. So the upper end contains two process and two notches. Now come to the olecranon process. Olecranon process, it has five surfaces: upper surface, anterior surface, posterior surface, medial surface and lateral surface. So this one is upper surface of the olecranon process. Then this is anterior surface, posteriorly posterior surface, and medially is medial surface. This surface will be the medial surface, and laterally lateral surface. Now come to the upper surface or superior surface. Superior surface, in its rough posterior two-third, there is attachment of the insertion of triceps brachii muscle. Okay, this is the superior surface of the olecranon process. In its rough posterior two-third, there is insertion of the triceps brachii muscle, and its anteriorly there is capsular ligament of the elbow joint, and in between the insertion of the triceps brachii muscle and capsular ligament there is a synovial bursa. Now come to the anterior surface. Anterior surface, it forms the upper part of the olecranon notch. This is the anterior surface. It forms the upper part of the trochlear notch. Then come to the posterior surface. This is the posterior surface of ulna. Posterior surface, it forms a subcutaneous triangular area. Look at that. This is a subcutaneous triangular area. This is a triangular subcutaneous area on the posterior surface. A synovial bursa lies in between skin and this triangular area. So it is subcutaneous. So between skin and this triangular area there lies a subcutaneous bursa. Sorry, synovial bursa. Then come to the medial surface. So these are the medial surface. So this surface will be the medial surface. The medial surface, it forms the upper part of the medial surface of the shaft. So there is nothing significant in the medial surface. It forms the upper part of the medial surface of the shaft. And lateral surface, it also forms the upper part of the lateral surface of the shaft. That means there is nothing significant in these two, medial surface and lateral surface. Now come to the coronary process. Coronary process has four surfaces: superior surface, anterior surface, medial surface and lateral surface. The superior surface, this is the superior surface. So the superior surface of the coronary surface of the coronary process, it forms the lower part of the trochlear notch. The superior surface of the coronary process, it forms the lower part of the trochlear notch, this part. And anterior surface, it is triangular shaped. Look at that. The anterior surface of the coronary process is triangular shaped, and in its lower corner it presents a tuberosity, that is ulnar tuberosity. This part is the ulnar tuberosity. And a important muscle, that is brachialis, it is inserted in the whole anterior surface and ulnar tuberosity. The brachialis muscle that is inserted in the whole anterior surface of the coronoid process, including this ulnar tuberosity. Then medial margin of the anterior surface is sharp, and it provides attachment of the three muscle from proximal to distal. Look at that, its medial margin is sharp and it provides attachment of the three muscle from proximal to distal. These are the flexor digitorum superficialis, then pronator teres, then flexor pollicis longus. So from above downwards or from proximal to distal, the muscles are flexor digitorum superficialis, then pronator teres, and then flexor pollicis longus. Now come to the medial surface. Medial surface of the coronoid process, it gives attachment to the flexor digitorum profundus. Okay. This is the medial surface. This will be the medial surface. This surface will be medial surface. So medial surface, the medial surface of the coronoid process. This is the medial surface of the coronoid process. It provides attachment to the flexor digitorum profundus. Then come to the lateral surface. The lateral surface, the upper part of the lateral surface of the coronoid process possess a radial notch for articulation with the head of the radius and form superior radio-ulnar joint, which is a pivot type of synovial joint. Look at that. This is the lateral surface. This part will be the lateral surface. So in its upper part there is a radial notch. Look at that. This part is called radial notch of the ulna. It articulates with the head of the radius. Look at that. This is the head of the radius. It articulates with the head of the radius and forms superior radio-ulnar joint, which is a pivot type of synovial joint. Then come to the lower part. Just below the radial notch there is a depressed area. It's called supinator fossa, and this supinator fossa accommodates radial tuberosity during supination and pronation. So just below the radial notch there is a depressed area. So there is a depressed area. This part is called supinator fossa. This supinator fossa accommodates radial tuberosity. You know, this is radial tuberosity. So this supinator fossa will accommodate this radial tuberosity. This supinator fossa accommodates radial tuberosity during pronation and supination of the forearm. This supinator fossa is bounded behind by a crest that is called supinator crest. So this was supinator fossa, and behind the supinator fossa there was a crest that is called supinator crest. So this one will be the supinator crest. Okay, this one is the supinator crest and this is supinator fossa. So from both this supinator fossa and supinator crest there is origin of the supinator muscle. Then come to the notches. We know there are two notches. One is trochlear notch and another one was radial notch. The trochlear notch, look at that. This is trochlear notch. This is C-shaped structure. C-shaped structure, and this is articulates with the trochlea of the humerus and form humero-ulnar joint, which is a part of the elbow joint, and its margin provides attachment to the capsule of the elbow joint. So look at that trochlear notch. It is C-shaped and it articulates with the trochlea of the humerus and forms humero-ulnar joint, which is a part of the radial joint. Which is a part of elbow joint, and its margin provides attachment to the capsule of the elbow joint. Now come to the radial notch. We have already discussed the radial notch. It articulates with this one is the radial notch. This articulates with the head of the radius and form superior radial ulnar joint, which is a pivot type of synovial joint. Now come to the shaft. This is the shaft of the ulna. In shaft there are 3 borders and 3 surfaces. What are the borders? 3 borders are anterior border, posterior border and lateral border. The anterior border, it starts from the medial side of the ulnar tuberosity and ends at the base of the styloid process. So it starts from the medial side of the ulnar tuberosity and then it goes downwards and it ends at the base of the styloid process. Okay, so these will be the anterior surface from medial part of the ulnar tuberosity. It starts and it goes downwards and ends at the base of the styloid process. So this is anterior border. Now come to the posterior border. So come to the lateral border. The lateral border is the sharpest border. Above it is continuous with the supinator crest and below it is ill-defined. So this one is the lateral border. Above it is continuous with the supinator crest and below it ends. Below it is not well defined, it is ill defined. Okay, so we are drawing the lateral border again. So it starts from the supinator crest and in lower half it is ill defined, that means it is not clearly visible. Then come to the posterior border. So this is the posterior border. It starts from apex of the triangular subcutaneous area on the back of the ulnar process and ends at the styloid process. Okay, that means this was the subcutaneous area on the back of the ulnar process. So it starts from the apex of this subcutaneous triangular area, then it goes downwards and it ends at the styloid process of the ulna. So this is the posterior border. Now come to the surfaces. What are the surfaces? The ulna has 3 surfaces: anterior surface, posterior surface and medial surface. And the anterior surface, it lies in between anterior border and interosseous border. So it lies in between anterior border and this interosseous border. So this surface is the anterior surface. Then medial surface. Medial surface lies in between anterior border and posterior border. So this was anterior border. Okay, this was anterior border and posterior border is behind. So the surface will be just like this. So this surface will be the medial border. Now medial surface. Now come to the posterior surface. This surface is the posterior surface. It lies in between posterior border and interosseous border. This was the interosseous border. This was the from apex of the subcutaneous area. So this was the posterior border. So this surface is the posterior surface in between interosseous border and posterior border. Okay. Then come to the anterior surface. What are the muscular attachment of the surfaces? So let's see the muscular attachment of the ulna. At first come to the anterior surface. In its upper 3/4 there is attachment of the flexor digitorum profundus. So upper 3/4 of the anterior surface provides attachment to the flexor digitorum profundus, and its lower 1/4 there is origin of the pronator quadratus. So this is pronator quadratus, and just middle of this anterior surface there is a Nietzschean foramen, and the direction of each of this Nietzschean foramen is upward. Okay, so in just middle of this there will be Nietzschean foramen its direction will be the upward. So the growing end will be the opposite to this nutrient foramen. So the growing end of the ulna is the lower end. Now come to the medial surface. This part is the medial surface. The medial surface provides attachment in its upper two-third, that is flexor digitorum profundus. This part is the medial surface. Okay, this part is the medial surface. So in its upper two-third there is attachment of the flexor digitorum profunda. Then come to the posterior surface. So this is the posterior view of the ulna. There is an oblique line which divides the posterior surface into upper smaller and lower larger part. So this is the, so there will be an oblique line like this. So by this oblique line, the posterior surface is divided into upper smaller and lower larger part. In its upper smaller part there is attachment of the anconeus muscle. Look at that. So this part will be the upper smaller part and this part will be the lower larger part. So in this upper smaller part there is attachment of this muscle, that is anconeus muscle, and the lower larger part is further divided by a vertical line into a lateral part and medial part. So the lower larger part is further divided by a vertical line into lateral part and medial part. So this part is the lateral part and this part is the medial part. From the lateral part the three muscles are originated. What are they? Abductor pollicis longus, extensor pollicis longus and extensor indicis. So from its upper 1/4 there is abductor pollicis longus, origin of the abductor pollicis longus. This is the abductor pollicis longus, and from the medial 1/4 there is attachment of extensor pollicis longus. This is extensor pollicis longus muscle, and from the next 1/4 there is origin of the extensor indicis. This muscle is the extensor indicis, and the lower 1/4 is there is no muscle, that means it is devoid of muscle. And the medial part, it actually is the part of the medial surface. Okay, so there will be the attachment of the flexor digitorum profundus muscle, and the vertical line which divides the posterior surface into lateral part and medial part, this vertical line, or we can say the posterior border, there is a common aponeurosis from where the flexor carpi ulnaris, extensor carpi ulnaris and flexor digitorum profundus arises. Okay, so the vertical line or the posterior border, there is a common aponeurosis for the flexor carpi ulnaris, extensor carpi ulnaris and flexor digitorum profundus muscle. Then come to the lower end. The lower end has two parts, that is head and styloid process. The head, this is the head, this part is the head, and this is the styloid process. Okay, so on its lateral side the convex articular surface for articulation with the ulnar notch of the radius and forms inferior radial ulnar joint. Look at that. The lateral surface of the head of the radius, there is an articular surface. It articulates with the ulnar notch of the radius. It articulates with the ulnar notch of the radius and forms the inferior radio-ulnar joint, which is a pivot type of synovial joint. And its inferior surface is smooth. Inferior surface is smooth, and it is separated from the wrist joint by an articular disc. So inferior surface is separated from the wrist joint by a articular disc. so that the ulnar bone cannot take part in formation of wrist joint. So only the radius which takes part in formation of wrist joint by articulation with the scaphoid and lunate. So in case of wrist joint there is no ulnar contribution. Okay. Now come to the styloid process. Styloid process, it lies posterior-medially. Okay. And tip of the styloid process, there is attachment of the medial collateral ligament. So the tip of the styloid process gives attachment to the medial collateral ligament of wrist joint. And in the posterior surface of the ulna, there is a groove in between styloid process and head of the ulna. This groove provides attachment of tendon of extensor carpi ulnaris muscle. Okay, so between the head and styloid process in the posterior surface there is a groove. So here passage of tendon of extensor carpi ulnaris muscle. Now come to the ossification center. Humerus is ossified. The ulna is ossified from the 3 ossification center. One for the upper end, one for the lower end, and one for the shaft. The ossification of upper end, it starts from the 9 years of age and it completed at the 18 years of age. And the lower end, it starts from the 6 years of age and it completed or fusion occurs in the age of 20 years. And in shaft, it is primary ossification center. It starts ossification of the 8th week of intrauterine life. Now let's discuss about the clinical anatomy regarding this ulna bone. There are 2 clinical conditions. One is Monteggia fracture and another one is Gallagher fracture. Okay, so what are these? Let's see. If the fracture occurs in the upper third of the ulna or in the upper part of the ulna, like this, if fracture occurs in the upper third of the ulna or upper part of the ulna with dislocation of this radial head, this is called Monteggia fracture. And what is Gallagher fracture? The Gallagher fracture is fracture of the distal part of the radius, that means or lower part of the radius, along with dislocation of the inferior radio-ulnar joint. This is called Gallagher fracture. Okay. So if the ulna fractures in the upper part with dislocation of the radius head, this is called Monteggia fracture. And if the fracture occurs in lower part of the radius along with the dislocation of the inferior radio-ulnar joint, this is called Gallagher fracture. So how to remember this? There is a mnemonic to remember this clinical anatomy. That is, we can remember this clinical anatomy by a mnemonic, that is Grimas. Okay. That means in case of Gallagher fracture, the radius bone is fractured in its inferior part. So this is Gallagher fracture. And in case of Monteggia fracture, there is fracture of the ulnar bone in its superior part. So by this mnemonic we can remember the Monteggia fracture and Gallagher fracture. That means the Gallagher fracture, in case of Gallagher fracture, the radius will be fractured in its inferior part, and along with the fracture of the radius there will be the dislocation of inferior radio-ulnar joint. But in case of the Monteggia fracture, there will be the fracture of the ulnar in its superior part along with the dislocation of the radial head. So this is Monteggia fracture. So at first let's learn about the anatomical points of the ulna. So there are 3 to 4 anatomical points. At first, the broad hook like upper end is directed upwards. Look at that, that is look like hook. This broad hook like part is directed upwards or above. The concavity of the hook like upper end is directed forward. Look at that, this upper part is contain a hook like structure, and this concavity of this hook like structure, look at that, this concavity is directed anteriorly. The sharp crest like border is lies laterally. This is the sharp crest like border and this will face laterally. And the styloid process lies in the lower end and is directed posteriorly. This is the styloid process. It is located in the lower end and is directed posterior medially. So these are the anatomical points of ulna. Thank you very much.